The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
September 3rd, 1965, Exeter, New Hampshire. It was past 2 a.m., and the town of Exeter was wrapped in darkness. The roads were empty, the houses silent, and the only sound that broke the stillness of the night was the distant hum of crickets. A young man named Norman Muscarello, only 18 years old, was hitchhiking home along Route 150. He had spent the evening with his girlfriend in Amesbury, Massachusetts, and was now making his way back to Exeter. The road stretched endlessly before him, flanked by dense trees that swayed in the cool night breeze. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding red light lit up the sky. Norman froze. His heart pounded in his chest. The light wasn't from a car or an airplane. It was too big, too bright, and moving too fast. It hovered above the trees, silent but menacing. Suddenly, the light dropped down, illuminating the road like a spotlight. Norman could feel the heat against his skin. Was it looking at him? He didn't wait to find out. In sheer terror, he bolted toward the nearest house, banging on the door, screaming for help. No answer. The light lurched closer, and Norman knew he had to escape. He sprinted toward the town, his breath ragged, his heart racing, until he reached the Exeter police station. "You gotta help me," he gasped. "Something is out there." Officer Eugene Bertrand, who had been patrolling the highways that night, listened carefully. At first, it sounded like a case of nerves. But then, Norman's sheer panic convinced him otherwise. Bertrand decided to investigate. Officer Bertrand and Norman drove back toward the site, their headlights cutting through the thick fog. As they reached the spot where Norman had seen the lights, they were met with an eerie silence. Then, as if on cue, it returned. A massive, disc-shaped object with pulsing red lights hovered above the trees. It tilted slightly, as if watching them. Bertrand felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. Suddenly, the radio in the patrol car crackled with static. Then, the object shot straight up into the sky, disappearing into the night. Bertrand and Norman weren't the only ones who saw it. That same night, multiple officers and residents reported the same eerie red lights moving through the sky, seemingly defying the laws of physics. The Air Force later dismissed the sightings as military exercises, but the witnesses knew better, because that night in Exeter, something unexplainable happened, and it has haunted the town ever since. It was a cold December night in 1980 when Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's 7-year-old grandson, Colby, drove along a quiet road near Huffman, Texas. The stretch of highway was dark and empty, the thick pine forests casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. The trio was returning home after a quiet evening out, when something utterly bizarre unfolded before them. Ahead, hovering just above the road, was a huge, glowing, diamond-shaped object. It pulsed with an intense, fiery light, illuminating the surrounding trees in an unearthly glow. Heat radiated from the craft, so strong that even inside the car, the trio could feel it on their skin. Betty, mesmerized and curious, pulled the car to a stop. As they watched, the craft emitted a deep, rumbling sound, almost like a roaring furnace. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, metallic behemoth, suspended in mid-air, defying gravity. Then, out of nowhere, a formation of unmarked, military-style helicopters appeared. More than 20 of them, flying in tight formation, seemed to be escorting or pursuing the mysterious object. Vicky, deeply religious, clutched Colby and whispered prayers, convinced they were witnessing something divinal, something terrifyingly unnatural. Despite the intense heat, Betty stepped out of the car for a closer look. She shielded her face from the searing air, staring in disbelief at the bizarre machine before her. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the glowing object began to rise, tilting slightly before disappearing into the sky, with the helicopters following close behind. Shaken but still unaware of the full extent of what had just happened, they got back in the car and drove home. But the real horror was yet to come. That night, all three of them began to feel sick. Their skin burned, their heads throbbed, and waves of nausea overcame them. The next morning, Betty's face was swollen and covered in blisters. Vicky and Colby also suffered from strange rashes and hair loss. It was as if they had been exposed to radiation. Yet, when they sought medical help, the doctors were baffled. What could cause such sudden and severe symptoms? As their health deteriorated, so did their sense of security. Something had happened to them that night, something no one was willing to explain. And this was just the beginning. Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and young Colby had survived a night they would never forget. But as days passed, the strange encounter near Huffman, Texas, left them with something far worse than just fear their bodies were deteriorating. Betty suffered the worst. Her skin was covered in painful burns and strange blisters. Her hair began falling out in clumps, and she was constantly weak and nauseous. Vicky and Colby also had burns and unexplained sickness, though not as severe. They all developed eye infections and sores, and even the slightest touch to their skin caused intense pain. Desperate for help, they sought medical attention, but doctors were baffled. Their symptoms resembled radiation poisoning, something almost unheard of outside of nuclear accidents. But how could they have been exposed? Vicky tried reaching out to government agencies. She was convinced the military knew something about what happened that night. She contacted local air bases, demanding answers. But each time, she was met with denials and silence. The helicopters, no record of them. The craft, nothing on radar. Their burns, no explanation. It was as if the entire event had been erased. Determined to find justice, Betty and Vicky filed a lawsuit against the US government, claiming they had been injured by a secret military experiment gone wrong. If those helicopters were escorting the craft, then surely someone knew the truth. But the case was dismissed. The government denied any involvement, stating they had no knowledge of any craft or military operation that night. Betty's health never fully recovered. She was in and out of hospitals for years, suffering from chronic illness and severe complications. She never stopped searching for answers. The true nature of what happened on that December night remains a mystery. Some believe the craft was a top-secret military experiment, possibly a nuclear-powered aircraft being tested. Others think it was something not of this world, and that the helicopters were trying to contain an event they couldn't control. To this day, the US government has never admitted to any involvement. No official records exist of helicopters in the area, and the origin of the diamond-shaped craft remains unknown. Betty, Vicky, and Colby paid a terrible price for witnessing something they were never meant to see. And in the end, the only thing left was their story, a terrifying encounter that no one could explain. The depths of the Baltic abyss, June 15th, 2012, shrouded the Baltic Sea a cold, grey expanse between Sweden and Finland in a thick, oppressive fog. The water lay still, a mirror of slate reflecting the overcast sky, the air heavy with the scent of brine and decay drifting from the depths. Aboard the Anselus, a weathered salvage vessel, the Ocean X, team led by Peter Lindbergh, 47, a grizzled diver with a knack for the unknown, prepared to probe an anomaly 300 feet below. Detected weeks earlier by sonar, a circular structure 60 meters wide, resting on the seabed like a scar. The ship hummed softly, its engines idling as Dennis Searsberg, 39, Peter's wiry captain, calibrated the ROV remotely operated vehicle, its cameras glinting in the dim light. The wind shifted, a sluggish breeze turning sharp and frigid, whistling across the deck with a high, keening edge that prickled their scalps. The sonar flickered, a solid return pulsing at 64N20E, and a low thrum pulsed from below, vibrating through the hull into their bones. "Something's down there," Peter muttered, his breath fogging in the chill, as the air thickened with a stench sulfur and something rancid, like burnt oil laced with rot, that stung their nostrils. The ROV plunged, its lights cutting through the murky green, descending into the abyss. At 200 feet, the thrum grew louder, rattling the cables, and the radio crackled a garbled hiss, not Swedish. Wait, then died, its static hot in their ears. The screen flared 60 meters wide, a perfect circle, its surface a smooth, matte grey, etched with spiraling grooves like veins, rising 12 feet from the seabed. "It's no rock," Dennis rasped, his hands trembling on the controls, as the structure loomed silent, ancient. Alive, its edges sharp against the dark, glowing faintly with blue pulses along its rim. "It's a wreck, or something else," Peter whispered, zooming the ROV's camera. Catching a trail 200 meters long, gouged into the seabed, as if it had crashed eons ago. The stench surged a wave of decay that buckled their knees, and the thrum rementified, shaking the Anselus, rattling the deck. A beam erupted from the structure white, searing sweeping the ROV, locking on its lens. Peter's skin burned where the reflection hit, a cold fire searing his face, and a sound pierced his skull, high-pitched whir, like a drill shredding steel, driving blood from his nose. A voice not heard but felt hissed in his mind. "You disturb." The ROV's feed flickered, its lights dimming as a grey mist sprayed from the structure oily, warm coating the camera, burning its casing, a stench of rot that seeped through the screen into the cabin. "It's alive," Dennis shouted, yanking the controls. But the ROV froze power, surging and dying, its thrusters dead, hovering 10 feet above the anomaly. The whir spiked, blue pulses flaring brighter. Pulsing faster, heartbeat gone wild. Dan shadows moved small, humanoid, 4 feet tall, gliding along the structure's edge. Their eyes black, unblinking, gleaming like oil slicks in the ROV's light. Crewman Stefan Heiberg, 31, grabbed binoculars, peering through the fog at the surface, nothing visible. Yet the water-churned whitecaps erupting in a perfect circle above the anomaly, as if something stirred below. "They're watching us," he rasped, his hands trembling as the tick-tick-tick like claws tapping glass code through the hull, a chorus of menace in the deep. The ship lurched, engines coughing, and a second beam swept upward, locking on the Anselus, freezing the crew mid-step. Their breath shallow, the stench choking their throats like ash. At 3 p.m., 2 hours into the dive, the structure pulsed, its blue veins flaring once, twice, then dimmed, a silver glow retreating into its core. The ROV jolted free, its feed snapping back, but the thrum lingered, rippling the water as the Anselus pulled anchor, retreating 5 miles west. The wind died, leaving a silence so deep it crushed their ears, broken only by the faint tick-tick rising from the depths, a ghost in the steel. The sea bore scars a warm patch where the anomaly lay, fish floating belly up, their scales streaked with that oily mist heard by a passing trawler whispering of lights below till dusk. Peter slumped on deck, his nose still bleeding, his skin blistered, the stench clinging to his gear like a curse. Dennis staggered back, his hands trembling, the mist's burn marks red on his arms, the ROV's casing warped grey residue defying the cold, burning Stefan's gloves when he touched it. Sonar glitched for days ghost blips, replaying we wait, and the wind over the Baltic wailed on, carrying a faint whir-whir, were heard by fishermen miles off. A Russian sub, 20 miles east, reported anomalous returns that week, its crew coughing on that stench till dawn. On May 20th, 1967, Stefan Michalak, an amateur geologist and prospector, set out into the remote wilderness near Falcon Lake, Manitoba. He had visited the area several times before, searching for valuable minerals. Equipped with his tools and a small notebook, he wandered deep into the forest, enjoying the solitude. That morning, as he explored the rocky terrain near the lake, something unusual caught his attention, a pair of glowing cigar-shaped objects hovering in the sky. He watched in stunned silence as one of them descended, landing on a nearby rock formation. The other craft hovered momentarily before vanishing into the clouds. Curiosity got the better of Michalak, and he cautiously approached the landed object. The air smelled strongly of sulfur, and a wave of heat radiated from the metallic surface. He noted its smooth, seamless exterior, devoid of any visible seams or rivets. Strange, high-pitched noises emanated from within, like a mechanical worry. As he examined the mysterious craft, he saw an opening appear on the side. Inside, dim lights flickered, and mechanical panels glowed with an eerie luminescence. He called out in several languages, Polish and Russian, hoping for a response. Silence. Then, without warning, the hatch abruptly shut and the craft shifted. As Michalak reached out to touch its exterior, his gloved hand met an intense wave of heat that burned straight through the fabric. He stumbled back in pain, just as the craft emitted a powerful gust of air and a flash of light from a grid-like exhaust panel on its side. A scorching blast struck him in the chest, sending him sprawling onto the ground. The craft lifted off effortlessly, disappearing into the sky. Michalak lay on the ground, gasping, his body trembling from the searing pain in his abdomen. When he looked down, he saw a pattern of burn marks, grid-like formation etched into his skin. Dazed and in agony, Michalak stumbled back to his campsite, feeling nauseous and disoriented. He eventually made his way back home to Winnipeg, where his symptoms worsened. Severe burns covered his torso, his hair and clothing were singed, and he suffered from nausea, dizziness, and intense headaches. Doctors who examined him were baffled by the grid-like burn marks, which defied conventional medical explanation. Over time, his health deteriorated further. Radiation tests were conducted, but the results were inconclusive. Investigators from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, and the United States Air Force studied the case, but were unable to provide a satisfactory explanation. Despite exhaustive research, no evidence of a hoax was found. Michalak's story remains one of the most perplexing UFO encounters in history. The physical evidence, including burn marks, radiation traces, and his declining health, continues to puzzle experts. Was he truly the victim of an extraterrestrial encounter? Or was there another explanation, one we are yet to understand? To this day, the Falcon Lake incident remains an unsolved mystery. A chilling reminder that sometimes the unknown is closer than we think. The Orb over the Holy City, January 28, 2011. Cloaked Jerusalem, a city carved from ancient stone and sacred whispers in a cold, starlit stillness. The air hung heavy with the scent of olive trees and incense drifting from the old city. The night settling over the Mount of Olives with a hush that pressed against the soul. At 1 a.m., the streets lay empty, the golden dome of the rock gleaming faintly under a waxing moon, its silhouette a beacon against the dark hills beyond. Eli Cohen, 32, a night watchman with a wiry frame and restless eyes, stood on a balcony overlooking the Temple Mount, his flashlight sweeping the shadows of the ancient walls. The wind shifted a gentle breeze, turning sharp and frigid, whistling through the stones with a high, keening edge that prickled his scalp. The cities hummed distant prayers. The murmur of late-night pilgrims faded into an unnatural silence, broken only by a low thrum-thrum pulsing from the sky, vibrating through the ground into his boots. His radio crackled garbled hiss, not Hebrew, we judge, then died, its static hot in his hand. He glanced up, his breath fogging in the chill, and froze. A light white, blinding erupted over the dome of the rock, hovering 200 feet above the golden roof. It resolved into an orb 10 feet wide, its surface a shimmering silver that pulsed faintly, as if alive, rimmed with a halo of red flickers like embers in the dark. It hung motionless, silent save for that thrum-thrum, its glow casting jagged shadows that twisted across the dome, the walls, the city below. The air thickened with a stench ozone and something rancid, like burnt metal laced with sulfur that stung his nostrils. And the wind howled now, a shrieking wail that shook the olive trees and sent a flurry of dust swirling, blotting out the stars. Ya Allah, Eli rasped, fumbling for his phone, his hands trembling as he hit record, the orb looming stark against the night. Across the valley, tourists on the Mount of Olives. Michael Reed, 45, an American photographer, and his wife, Sarah, saw it too, their camera rolling, catching the same sight from a second angle. "It's no drone," Michael whispered, his lens trembling, revealing a shape smooth, featureless, its surface rippling with blue veins, pulsing in sync with a faint tik-tik-tik, like claws tapping stone that echoed through the hills. The stench surged a wave of decay that buckled their knees, and the thrum-thrum grew louder, rattling the stones, shaking the dome's golden tiles. A beam erupted from the orb white, searing sweeping the Temple Mount, locking on Eli. His skin burned where it touched, a cold fire searing his face, and a sound pierced his skull, a high-pitched whir, like a saw shredding bone, driving blood from his nose. A voice not heard, but felt hissed in his mind. "You are judged." His phone slipped, cracking on the balcony, its screen flickering as the beam swung to the dome, bathing it in a ghostly glow. Michael's footage caught it red lights flaring brighter, pulsing faster, heartbeat gone wild, as a grey mist sprayed from the orb's base oily, warm coating the dome, the walls, the air, burning where it settled, a stench of rot that choked their throats. "It's alive," Sarah sobbed, clutching Michael's arm as the whir spiked, the orb descending lower 100 feet, Naut's glow intensifying, shadows stretching like claws across the city. A third witness, Herson, a taxi driver near the Lion's Gate, saw it from below, his headlights dimming, engine coughing, the mist seeping into his cab, burning his hands raw. At 1:05 a.m., 5 minutes after it appeared, the orb tilted, its red lights flaring once, twice, then dropped 50 feet above the dome, hovering for a heartbeat as if testing the air. Then it streaked upward, a silver dart piercing the sky, vanishing into the void with a final thrum from that. Rippled the stones, a circle of cracked earth spreading around the mount like a wound. The wind died, leaving a silence so deep it crushed their ears, broken only by the faint tick-tick-tick lingering in the olive groves, a ghost in the dark. Eli slumped against the railing, his nose still bleeding, his skin blistered, the stench clinging to his clothes like a curse. Michael and Sarah staggered back, their camera trembling, the mist's burn marks red on their hands. Hassan's cab wouldn't start, its battery drained, its hood warm with that grey residue defying the chill, burning his fingers when he touched it. The dome bore scars, a warm patch on its roof, a grey film on its tiles, heard by pilgrims whispering of a presence till dawn. A fourth vidashaki from the Jewish quarter surfaced later. The orb, stark against the night, its ascent a streak of fire. Israeli police swept in by 2 a.m. balloon. They claimed dismissing radar blanks as equipment failure, but witnesses stood firm. Eli's footage, backed by Michael, Sarah, Hassan, and dozens more pilgrims, guards, drivers, their tails in dread, orb, alive, watching. The IDF, hushed it, logs buried, phones confiscated but videos leaked. For angles, stark and raw, a crack in the silence. The shadows of the Roosevelt, March 2014, stretched a cold grey dawn over the Atlantic Ocean off the eastern coast of the United States, 100 miles from Jacksonville, Florida. The sea lay flat, a mirror of slate reflecting the overcast sky, the air crisp with salt and the faint tank of jet fuel wafting from the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a Nimitz-class carrier on a training mission. The ship hummed with activity F. A-18 Super Hornets prepped on the flight deck. The distant roar of engines cutting through the stillness yet. The morning felt heavy, a weight pressing on the crew's shoulders. At 9 a.m., the wind shifted, a sluggish breeze turning sharp and frigid, whistling across the deck with a high, keening edge that rattled the antennas. Radar operator LT, Ryan Graves, 32, a lean man with steady eyes, hunched over his console in the CIC Combat Information Center, his screen tracing the blips of friendly jets. The radar flickered a cluster of returns, 5, then 7 appearing 30 miles east, hovering at 30,000 feet, no transponders, no jet trails. Bogies, Graves muttered, adjusting his scope. But they darted 20,000 feet in a blink defying physics. The air thickened with a stench ozone and something sour, like burnt circuits, laced with sulfur that seeped into the CIC, stinging his eyes. A low thrum-thrum pulsed through the hull, vibrating the steel, and the radio crackled a garbled hiss, not English, we, HUNT, then died, its static hot in his headset. He alerted LTC MDR, Alex Dietrich, 34, a seasoned pilot leading a 2-plane sortie with LT Danny Acoin. Their Hornets screamed skyward, climbing to 25,000 feet over the Kordnetzer, churning patch of ocean below. The thrum-thrum grew louder, rattling their cockpits, and the horizon shimmered, heat-like distortion bending the clouds. Visual contact, Dietrich radioed, her voice tight as a shape emerged 30 feet long, oval, grey as ash, no wings. No engines, hovering 12,000 feet above the waves, its surface pulsing faintly blue, as if alive. Dietrich banked closer, her Hornet's flare locking on the gimbal object spinning slowly, its edges sharp, defying the wind's fury. It darted up-down, sideways, matching her every move with impossible agility. Silent, save for that thrum-thrum-thrum pulsing through the air. the water beneath roiled whitecaps erupting in a circle. As if something stirred below it, the object floated serene, a predator's calm. "It's tracking me," she growled, diving to 10,000 feet, G-forces pressing her into her seat. But it shot upward 15,000 feet in a heartbeat, hovering again, taunting her. A coin's camera caught it grey, featureless, a ghost on the screen, and a faint tick-tick-tick echoed through their headsets, like claws tapping metal. The stench hit a wave of rot that fogged their visors, their breath shallow as the thrum-thrum spiked, shaking the jets. Dietrich pushed closer, 300 feet, now the object tilting, revealing an underside etched with spiraling lines, glowing blue as if breathing. A beam flared white, blinding, sweeping her cockpit, and a sound erupted, a high-pitched whir, like a turbine shredding flesh, piercing her skull. Her nose bled, her ears rang, and a voice not heard but felt slithered into her mind. "You are prey." The HUD flickered, altimeter spinning, compass whirling, and the jet lurched, power surging, then dropping as if gripped by an unseen hand. A coin shouted, "It's on you." The object streaking behind Dietrich, pacing her at 500 knots, a shadow on her 6. She banked hard, sweat beading under her helmet, but it stuck silent, relentless, then broke off, darting east at Mach 3, vanishing from sight. A second object, go fast, blipped on radar, skimming the waves at 50 feet, 200 knots. No wake, no heat, a grey blur defying the sea. The whir were faded, leaving a silence so deep it crushed their ears, broken only by the faint tick-tick-tick lingering in the static, a whisper in the void. Back on the Roosevelt Graves' radar, flared 7 blips scattering, then merging into one massive, hovering 10 miles off the bow, LT. Chad Underwood launched later, his fleur locking on the gimbal again 30 feet. Smooth, spinning over the sea, jamming his targeting with a pulse that fried the screen. "It's hunting us," he radioed, his voice trembling. As the object streaked upward 40,000 feet, in seconds vanishing into the clouds with a final thrum-thrum that rippled the water below, a circle of foam spreading like a wound. The ocean grew still, but the air stayed heavy, the stench clinging to the deck, the tick-tick-tick echoing faintly through the ship's hull. Dietrich landed, her Hornet's canopy fogged, a grey residue coating the wings, warm, oily, burning her crew chief's hands. The Roosevelt's radar glitched for hours, ghost blips replaying "we, HUNT," and sailors whispered of shadows in the water, dark shapes beneath the waves, eyes glimpsed on night watch, gone by dawn. A civilian flight, 50 miles west, reported a grey streak at 30,000 feet, its cabin buzzing with that thrum-thrum for seconds before silence. The year was 1976, and the city of Tehran, Iran, was about to witness one of the most chilling and unexplainable encounters with an unidentified flying object. What began as a simple report of strange lights in the night sky quickly escalated into a terrifying and baffling event that would leave seasoned military pilots and government officials questioning reality itself. On the night of September 18, 1976, multiple residents in Tehran reported seeing bright, glowing lights hovering in the dark sky. The Iranian Air Force, already on high alert due to tensions in the region, took these reports seriously. Radar operators at Mehrabad International Airport confirmed an unknown object in the area, moving erratically at speeds impossible for conventional aircraft. The decision was made to scramble an interceptor jet to investigate. A McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II fighter jet was dispatched from Shahroki Air Base to engage the unidentified object. As the pilot approached, the mysterious craft suddenly accelerated at an unbelievable speed, moving away before he could get a clear visual. Then, as quickly as it had disappeared, it reappeared again in a different location. This erratic behavior was unlike anything the pilot had ever seen. Suddenly, his cockpit instruments began to malfunction. Communication with ground control became spotty, and the pilot struggled to keep the aircraft steady. Fearing a complete systems failure, he was ordered to return to base. As soon as he distanced himself from the object, all systems returned to normal. The event was strange, but what came next was even more terrifying. Unwilling to let the mysterious craft go unchallenged, the Iranian military scrambled a second F for Phantom II, piloted by Lieutenant General Parviz Jafari. He was a skilled and experienced pilot, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. As he closed in on the object, he saw a massive, glowing craft floating silently in the sky. It was unlike any aircraft known to man, radiating an intense, pulsating light. But then, something unexpected happened. The UFO emitted a smaller, glowing object, which began to move directly toward Jafari's jet. Believing he was under attack, Jafari attempted to fire his missiles at the fast-approaching entity. But the moment he engaged the weapons system, his entire aircraft malfunctioned. His radar shut down, communication was lost, and his control panel became unresponsive. The glowing object stopped just short of his aircraft, hovered for a moment, then darted away at an unimaginable speed. Jafari, shaken and unable to engage, decided to retreat. As he distanced himself from the UFO, his jet's systems inexplicably came back online. But the nightmare was far from over. As Major Jafari's F-4 Phantom jet hurtled through the night sky over Tehran, the enormous glowing craft remained eerily still, defying all logic. The Iranian Air Force had scrambled to fighter jets in response to multiple reports of an unidentified flying object hovering above the city. Yet, as Jafari closed in on the target, the impossible began to unfold. His weapons system suddenly malfunctioned. The moment he attempted to lock onto the object, his radar display flickered, and his missile controls went completely dead. It was as if an unseen force had disabled his jet's offensive capabilities. In that moment, fear crept into the veteran pilot's mind. This was no ordinary aircraft. Then, before he could react, the UFO released a smaller, glowing orb. The object darted toward his jet at an unthinkable speed. Instinctively, Jafari banked hard, attempting to evade what he believed to be an incoming attack. Just as the orb neared his aircraft, it suddenly changed course, looping around him before racing back toward the main UFO. His heart pounded. What kind of technology could move with such precision? Meanwhile, the second F-4 pilot, sent to assist Jafari, also experienced mysterious malfunctions. His navigation system shut down completely as he neared the glowing object. The UFO then shot upward at a mind-bending speed, disappearing beyond radar detection. As dawn broke over Tehran, both pilots returned to base shaken but unharmed. Their accounts of the encounter left military officials stunned. The Iranian government launched an investigation, and even the US Defense Intelligence Agency took interest, marking the case as one of the most credible UFO encounters ever recorded. But the truth remained elusive. What was it that Major Jafari and his fellow pilots had witnessed that night? Advanced military technology? An extraterrestrial craft? Or something else entirely? The Tehran UFO incident remains one of the most well-documented and chilling encounters in aviation history, one that left even hardened military personnel questioning what truly lurks in the skies above.